Yeah.
But he was so excited to prove, because this whole thing about the maternal imagination was something that a lot of these doctors believed, but it had never been proven true.
So he thought he was proving something
He
true.
thought he was proving
so
true.
he was ignoring the facts.
The scientific facts.
Yeah.
Because he was so excited about proving this thing. I'm going to be
the first one.
Yeah. And so he thinks, he's like, oh, I'm going to be famous.
Yeah.
You're going to be famous, but not for what you think. After the delivery he witnessed, the trunk of a rabbit, is what he saw. Mr. Molyneux placed one of the lungs in water, because it still had its lungs in it, where it floated, indicating it had been breathing air outside of a body. But St. Andre, he also discovered fish bones in the gut of a cat, because she had delivered cat parts at some point as well.
What?
She later delivered these cat parts, and he found fish bones in the gut as feces in his intestine. Yeah, so she's giving birth to dead animals, basically.
Yeah.
And they have proof that they
were not from inside her originally.
Right. Yes. They were walking around and breathing and eating
they couldn't,
fish.
You can't get fish inside your body without being able to eat them on your own.
You never know. Maybe they thought it was eating fish that she ate.
Well, they did think, or if she thought about fish and cats, that it just
ate the fish while it was in there with her. Yeah, because that's totally reasonable to think that.
Perfectly normal.
Right. But he also stated that on examination of her body, with pushing, he felt a lump on the right side, and he said, oh, it's because they're being formed in her fallopian tube. It's that's called a tubal pregnancy, and you die with those. But that's what
burst it open.
That's how he explained it away.
Okay.
Because it's not being formed in a normal fashion.
Right.
It's in her fallopian. There's still no air there.
No.
But yes.
They're not breathing and eating fish.
He said, so because he was concerned about this floating lung and, the intestines with poop in them, he examined Mary's breasts and he found milk in them. So obviously she's
pregnant.
Yeah, she's lactating. So
yeah, she has to. This has to be real.
Right. He also said that unusual fallopian tubes caused the gestation of the rabbits. Because her fallopian tubes are unusual.
Unusual, so she could have rabbits out of nowhere.
Yes.
Okay. Makes perfect sense.
Her fallopian tubes. So.
Yes. Women in their wily ways.
When Manningham examined her, diligently searching her whole vagina, yes, this is what he wrote in his notes, he discovered her cervix was closed and that nothing could come out of it. This poor woman is being pawed at and examined roughly by all of these men. That's
horrifying.
Yes, and her husband is there. So, she's young.
Yeah.
And she has to, she lives in a time when your husband is the head of house and you do what your husband says. So, keep that in mind.
Okay.
On November 29th, Mary Toft arrived in London because they decided to bring her to London so she could be observed by the King and the Prince of Wales. Yes, everyone.
Big deal.
We need to have every man in London come and stick their hand up your dress to feel your cervix. I mean,
that's basically what people want to do now.
Because I'm sure this girl loved this.
Yeah.
And she was lodged in a bagnio, which was a bathhouse. Some people refer to them as a brothel, but they technically weren't a brothel. They were just a place where men could go, probably brothely. But it was like a meeting house and a bathhouse. They could go and relax and hang out with men.
Yeah.
And there were probably women there.
We know what was going on, really.
We do. In Leicester Square, or they also called it Leicester Gardens or something weird. But it's basically in Leicester Square. She was kept under constant watch for 9 days by a group of elite men.
Oh, great.
Yes. At midnight of the same day, St. Andre wrote a letter, the same day that they brought her to London. So that same night, he wrote a letter to James Douglas, letting him know that he had brought the woman, in parentheses, to Leicester Fields, and that she was about to deliver a live rabbit because they could feel it moving around inside of her body. This is what he said. Yes. At this time, the men examined her repeatedly for days, multiple men.
Oh, good.
So all day long, she's getting examined by all the men that are there have to examine her, which is probably just an excuse to feel her up. So, I mean,
gross.
In her testimony, she referred to them touching her, but not in a good way. Like, it was
No!
rough. They're like, they were touching her, and it was not, like...
comfortable.
Gentle.
No, I'm sure it was very uncomfortable.
They're, like, checking her cervix and stuff.
I know.
Anybody who's pregnant, that is uncomfortable.
It's not comfortable.
Even if you're not pregnant. But
no.
This is not... They're not using a speculum. They're using their hands.
They're just shoving their hand up there.
And...
like she's a puppet or something.
Yes! Isn't that awful?
Horrible.
It's awful. And it says, like, her husband and her sister-in-law were there with her in the room when this was all happening. And her London nurse, her name was Mary Costin. That was just, like, a weird random thing that they threw in there, and I don't think it's important. But,
That's her name.
I wrote it down at the time, and then it wasn't even necessary. But a lot of people who wrote accounts of the goings-on in this room marked that her husband just kind of stood there. He was never concerned for her because she was in a lot of pain, like, and it seemed real pain. And like they said, it's labor pains, but he didn't seem to worry about her.
Yeah,
he never asked to give her anything for the pain. He just kind of stood there, like
whatever happens, I don't care. Let him use her as a puppet.
Whatever,
it's fine. Well, that's all I can think of. Horrible.
And Douglas, who came, this man Douglas, he was not convinced of any of this.
Thank you,
right?
Douglas.
And she did not. And Mary actually did not deliver any more rabbits.
Good.
She was done with the deliveries. She was, Now Ehlers, who saw her in Surrey, he examined the rabbit parts that he had brought back to London and found hay, corn, and straw in the dung pellets of one of the rabbits. Which is also indicative that the rabbit was running around outside eating hay and straw and corn and pooping. Mm-hmm. You know, he's not going to get that inside of her.
No.
You know, so I mean that was another thing that made him believe that it was fake.
Right. Makes sense.
So she was still at this point. She was still suffering. She was in a lot of pain. She had a fever. She had a seizure and went unconscious. And was found to be suffering from an infection at this point.
Yeah. Bunch of dirty man hands up inside you.
Not to mention dead parts.
Animals and dirty man hands. Are going to make you have an infection.
And on December 4th, 1726, a porter was seen sneaking a rabbit into her room.
Oh, Jesus.
Yes. Her husband had been buying them for a month. He's
good Lord.
Buying these rabbits. Yes. The porter also confessed to taking bribes from Margaret Toft, who was a sister-in-law, to get her the smallest rabbits he could find.
This is horrifying.
Yeah, she said they were for eating, not for shoving up her sister-in-law.
Well, I mean, I don't think anyone would ever think that's what would happen with them.
Yes, but at least she was trying to find small rabbits.
I guess.
It's like, does Mary have... I wonder if this probably was even her idea.
I can't even.
Yes, so it's up. This is like December 4th and 5th. The jig is up, yes. Mary eventually confessed, but she wouldn't confess for a long time, but one of the doctors, Douglas, he threatened her with painful experimental surgery if she didn't confess to it.
Right.
So she confessed to the fraud and on December 7th. So like it took her a couple of days, but I mean, they were basically interrogating her and she's like, no, it's not. And then they're like, well, fine, we're going to do experimental surgery on you. It's going to be painful and you're not going to have, like, you're going to be awake.
Feel all of it.
You're going to feel all of it just to see what's going on inside your body. And she's like, no, it's fake.
Never mind, it's fake. I would have said it even if it wasn't at that point.
Me too. She stated she had manually put the rabbits inside of herself and also indicated her mother-in-law, John Howard, the original physician, and another local woman, but her husband was part of it. Like,
of course he was.
He probably was the mastermind about it. On December 9th, 1726, she was charged with being a notorious and vile cheat.
Oh my God.
And sent to Bridewell Prison and exhibited in front of a large crowd for days. Like, they basically would just stand her outside and let large crowds come and stare at her.
And say, that's the
notorious and
lady.
Vile cheat. What did she get out of it? Like, she cheated them out of...
What was the
She
point?
made these men look stupid.
Yeah, but what was the original intent of this?
They think it had to do with the protests. Her husband got arrested for protesting. They think it had a lot to do... It stemmed from that.
Okay.
Like, they were trying to show them... Like, because she basically... when they were interviewing her before they knew she was
a
cheat. Fraud, she was saying how she saw this rabbit in the field and she wanted to catch it and bring it home because she couldn't afford to buy one. She basically was admitting to trying to steal it, which could have gotten her in a lot of trouble. Right. But they didn't care about that. They're like, oh my God, it's maternal...
It's imagination.
Yes. This is like proof of it. She kept thinking of this rabbit. So, I mean, it was just like a hoax, but I think it was like done in protest, they think now. Like,
that's just friggin' messed up.
Yes.
I'm all for protest, but
not to
don't put rabbits in your vagina. How many can you fit in there?
She had 7 in there one day.
How?
But I don't know if they were all in there at once. I think it was like...
a couple at a time.
Because, I mean, they said she was constantly surrounded by people. So, obviously, some of the people surrounding her are in on the jig.
Yeah.
Or because, like, how...
Maybe they were checking her cervix and inserting bunnies. Oh, my God.
Yeah. And, I mean...
Where did you find this? This is awful.
I thought it was pretty horrible. I'm like, I need to do
terrible. Yeah, you're going to get worse than a yeast infection from this. This is not good.
And
you don't even... Listen, you're not even supposed to sit her... Listen, you're not even supposed to sit around your wet bathing suit, Margaret.
No wet dead rabbits.
Wet dead rabbits is probably taking it a bit far.
These are baby rabbits.
Oh, well, that makes it so much better.
Yeah, they came from that. Not hers, but, you know. Maybe that was the thought process. I have no idea.
Oh, my God. Bits of them.
Yeah, and, like, pig bladders.
And there was cat's parts.
Dead cat parts. Not just the whole cat, just parts of the cat.
Parts of the cat.
Just parts of the cat. And she said that in her testimony, there was one point where... St. Andre's was, like, examining her because she was about ready to birth the rabbit part. And he saw it, and instead of pulling it out, he shoved it in further. And because he said he wanted her to have the labor pains to push it out. What? He's a psycho! And I'm like, what? A nice doctor.
He's the royal doctor?
Yes.
Oh, good.
The medical professionals who were involved were mocked and ridiculed publicly and considered gullible. And, like, the papers tore them apart. Yeah. Like, they were mocked mercilessly.
You should be.
And there's one of the drawings that was in one of the newspapers that we'll post. It's, like, kind of mocking. It shows St. Andre because he was a dance instructor before he was a doctor. Okay. And it shows him standing in the front wearing a dancing costume and a dancing pose.
He should have stayed there.
He's orchestrating the whole dance.
Whole thing, yeah. Maybe he should have stuck to dancing.
Nathaniel St. Andre, he never recovered his reputation after this.
You're not gonna.
And he died in poverty in 1776 at age 96. So he lived a good long time, but he totally lost his credentials.
Well, I mean, come on, dude.
Yes.
You should.
The other doctors weren't affected like him.
Well, because he was the first one and he was all braggadocious about it.
Yeah, and he
ignored all the signs
that it was fake.
Oh, okay, here's the number one reason why it's fake. Animals coming out of someone's vagina. Right there. That's it. You don't need anything else.
And the maternal imagination is an imaginary thing.
Yeah, your imagination.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so Mary, who at this point is still very ill and in jail.
Yeah.
She remained in jail, but was eventually released April 8th of 1727. So she was in jail for a few months. And they let her go due to lack of evidence of guilt. So even though she was in jail for 4 months, they eventually dropped the charges because they couldn't actually prove any of it, even though she admitted to it.
Right.
So
whatever. I don't think you really need to go to jail for it. Maybe the psych ward.
I think a few years later, she was found like guilty of possessing stolen goods.
So she ended up in jail anyway?
I don't think so. No? I think that she had to pay a fine or something.
Okay.
And then she died January 13th of 1763.
Mm.
So that's the ridiculous story of Mary Toft and her rabbit vagina.
I hate this. I hate that anyone thought that this was an idea that you should do. I hate that anyone would go along with it. I hate that this was... How do you... This is some Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of stuff to me.
This is the wig era, Colleen.
Of course it is.
This was when wigs were a thing, and like in the drawings, all the men have curly wigs.
Oh yeah,
they were rich men. They had
rich, fancy,
ridiculous curly wig hair all over,
and there's probably lard in it, and pests,
and sticking their hands in a woman's vagina looking for rabbits.
Powder.
That's not where rabbits are.
Rabbit.